Hey there, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Sales Chatter. Today, we are going to talk consulting. We're going to talk tech. We're going to talk logistics. And we're going to talk what's next in this segment of business. Welcome back. And today I've got Aaron Hatfield with me. And, Aaron, we were just talking off stage, and I'll say it again because I'm actually very blown away that I have not had you on the show before to talk, because I'm paying attention to your posts, and man, you got some gold that you're dropping in the market. And I'm sorry that it's taken so long for me to get my head out of my arse and have you on this show, my man. But I'm really happy to have you
Don't
here today.
apologize whatsoever. I appreciate you being on. I enjoy what you put out, and I'm just happy to be here. So thank you very much. And yeah, don't apologize whatsoever. It's like I said earlier, I'm just another guy from Kentucky. So I appreciate it all the same.
Yeah, I hear you, man. That one thing that I've found in this whole thing is, you know, I think it's a real shame when somebody is trying to learn. Like I don't know about you, but I try and learn every day. And I've said it time and time and time again, brother, is that I feel anyone in this market that has something we can learn from. And I love that aspect of it. And I know before we hit record, you and I were having a little candid conversation about good old LinkedIn, and kind of where it's gone. And I want to start with kind of more focusing on where you're at right now, because I think this ties directly into logistics sales, which is the consulting piece. And I believe post pandemic, the consulting mindset is the mindset that will drive big growth in our industry. What are your thoughts?
I'd have to agree. And from a consulting mindset, back to a comment, our conversation earlier a little bit is, and what you said here a moment ago is that constant learning, right? From a consultative, embracing that consultative relationship based kind of educational approach, especially post pandemic, I think is going to really drive individuals, but also teams forward. So for instance, everybody talks about relationships. And, it's true with technology, especially breaking into the supply chain specifically in the quantity that it has or in the speed that it has, is sellers or whether it's brokers, whether you're a 3PL or you're working for a warehouse, you have to be able to cross and bridge that gap between your technical teams and your sales teams, because the whole layout, the whole field has changed, right? When I got in logistics and when you got in logistics, half of the stuff that we're experiencing today, that we're talking about today, that we're selling today, didn't exist. Is
90% of
right.
it, pretty much.
10 years ago when I was, breaking gum in a brokerage, there was no last mile. There was no, freight technology was coming into the picture, but it was a slow roll. And then, post pandemic, the way I really think teams, but also individuals, the best way for them to approach any type of, whether it's a deal or a conversation, with a decision maker, is approach it with the lens of, I know what I'm good at. I know what I can bring to the table, but I also want to have that back and forth. I want to have, because there's things that I don't know all the time, but have that confidence, but be willing to have more of a back and forth and less of a dirty sales kind of slap, pitch slap kind of thing.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I think the logistics industry is so far behind on tech, which is why there's such a big push now to get up to speed. I mean, I remember when I first came to Ontario in 2003, I came to an asset-based company from a brokerage in Quebec. And I'm going to say about 2 weeks after being here, the owner came to me and said, listen, we're going to Qualcomm, which was CanCom at the time, which satellite tracking. And he said, can you come with me? I said, sure. He says, just kind of want the salesperson's perspective on the system. And the one thing that blew my mind was the ability that CanCom had just put out. I think it was like 6 months before we got there. They'd finished the ability for customers to log in and see where the trucks are. And this was like state of the art. You got to be kidding me. That is the cat's ass. If you could do that, like my customers can actually have their own login. It's branded as my
Right.
company and they can track their trucks. All we do is click a button to turn it on and off. And they're like, yep. And I'm like, oh my Lord, like asset based is the way to go. Because at brokerage, we still had the fax machine that curled the
Right.
paper, right? We were still taking load sheets, hand writing them and faxing them, right? Like, but now you've got that system. Now, if you don't have that
Mm.
system, you're so far behind the eight ball. It's unbelievable. It's almost expected if the customer wants to track and trace themselves that you have the tools to do it. And I honestly think, and love your opinion on this too, I think this is why the AI bug has been blown so far out of proportion. And you see it all the time. You see all the memes, you see all the new software coming out where it's loaded with AI, and AI does so much. It's like it doesn't need to do that much. Like AI, and we just did a master class last week on AI, and it was incredible because I'm learning all the different functionalities of specific AI and what it can do and what it's for and da da da. And I don't know. I just think that our industry is way far behind. I mean, even on the ocean side, I think it's far behind. Like if you look at the tech world compared to us, it's like dinosaurs versus
Yeah.
2024. Does that
Oh,
make sense?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think, I mean, the supply chain, definitely the domestic US, but yeah, I'm glad you brought in, ocean. You can even take in air. Air seems to be developing a little bit quicker than ocean does.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's antiquated, for lack of a better term, comparatively to other industries, especially the tech industry. And we're at this weird convergence of both industries, which is good. But yeah, one of the detractors with, well, I'm very open with this, is I am okay with the skepticism behind artificial intelligence. If there's not a
Yep.
healthy skepticism, true innovation, beneficial development, it's never going to happen. You have to have
Hmm.
reasonable naysayers, right? Um,
Yep. I think we learned that with electric vehicles.
yes, yes. Honestly,
Hmm.
well, this might, there's a lot of similarities with my opinion on AI versus, EVs, especially is, I always say AI, and when it comes to Arvest, in my capacity as head of sales for them, when we're talking about Arvest and AI applications, is you have a lot of these, a lot of folks that say, oh, it's going to take your jobs. Oh, it's going to do this, or oh, it's going to do this. I don't
Hmm.
think we're that.
Yeah.
I don't think
Ryan and
we're
I
even
talked
close
about
to
that
that
last week
stage,
too.
but is being able to peel back the layers and find the very specific use cases that a brokerage or a freight forwarder or an based carrier, there are applications and use cases that are just tools in a toolbox to help amplify your team. And I think, like, for instance, I was at Home Depot the other day and I was picking up some stuff and I was walking through the aisle and I saw a washing machine. It said complemented with AI on the tag. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. I mean, hey, that sounds, yes, cool. It's a washing machine with AI. I don't know what.
Yeah. It'll summarize your book for you while it washes your
Right,
clothes.
exactly.
Perfect.
So it's like cross industry, people are slapping AI on everything, which is, it's a new,
Yeah.
it's a new shiny toy, and which is understandable. But I think that's where you really got to peel back the layers. You got to look, for, again, with Arvest, how are we helping warehouses? Well, it's with very practical, real life, real time issues that we're, and solutions that we're providing. So for instance, it's, you
Mm.
have to get down to the nitty gritty into very specific use cases. I never think it's a good idea for companies to just come in and throw out everything and then pile a whole new, tech stack on top, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. Is you have to know where you want to go before you
Oh.
start that journey. And I think a lot of times you get caught up
Well,
in the buzz.
they do, and there's also, I think, a big piece that most tech, sorry, let me rephrase that. At least when I started, like when we started selling Bridger as the wicked
Mhm.
CRM, transition costs.
Right.
There's a transition cost to
Right.
everything. And this brings me back to another topic because I don't want to get too far down the AI rabbit hole because I think you and I think especially you have way more to give the audience. Um, I want to go back to the
Yeah.
consultative piece, and I don't mean to just arbitrarily cut that AI discussion off because I do think it is one, and maybe we'll bring you back for another session on how AI is changing our industry because I see it more changing with an automation process above and beyond anything else. I think that's the best place for it in our industry. Um, but when it comes to
Mhm.
consulting, consultative approach, I look at the consultative approach from every level. As like a VP in a company, if you're a VP of sales, if you're a president, if you're a COO, a CTO, like I think everything comes down to consulting. And I believe wholeheartedly that as humans, if there's more of a consultative approach, right? Like if your company's looking to change the process in which things are done, we look at it more as instead of this is how it's going to be, it's like, okay, as a consultant, you come in and you go, okay, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's the process of how we're going to bridge this gap, here's how we're going to walk around it, here's how we're going to be fluid like water. And I think there's a big difference between sales and consulting.
Yes.
And I think it's such it's like a valley and a mountaintop, if
Yeah.
you will. And I truly believe, I remember having Joe Lynch on, gosh, 2.5 years ago. And he said, Dan, here's the deal. In the next couple of years, and this is before COVID, like before the pandemic, he said, in the next couple of years, it's going to come down to a bunch of things. One, consultative sales, and two, cost plus.
Yes.
The person who can put a cost plus program together, he believed years ago would win. After COVID, the cost plus is like the gangbuster of opportunities for customers because they now have, listen, I mean, you have tools like green screens, load links, rate systems, DATS, rate IQ, all that kind of stuff. But to have ground floor
Mm.
conversations with suppliers and say, what's the rate? What do you need? How do you need? And then filling out that paperwork and sending it to a customer and say, here's the median of the 5 carriers that we're going to do it. Here's the average. Here's what it's going to cost. We'll tell you which ones we're going to use, and having that raw data of actual phone calls, right? Because we know, and for those of you that don't know, most of the systems out there are on contracted
Mhm.
rates. I believe it's green screens where they're actually redefining that process where the data is traveling back and forth from logistics companies where they're sharing the data of what they're actually booking trucks for, right? But other than that, the mainstream rating tools or even average daily rates are all based on contracted rates. And if you've any of you are watching and listening that have listened to the show before, Dean's been very vocal on Wednesdays about we're usually 4 to 6 months
Yeah.
behind. So I think you got this fictitious number that, and I don't want to sound ill to anyone because I love DAT, I love LoadLink, I love green screens. They're all awesome. They all bring their own um, massive needs, and they're solving something in our industry which I think is mandatory. But I also think you got to be very careful. Like you can't base your business on it. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
no, I agree with you. And, I think, yeah, green screens, that data share back and forth, that's imperative. And especially, taking that consultative approach to sales, to logistics, to a project, whatever it might be,
To management,
yeah,
to
all the way
company.
up to the top of the chain, I think really we've gone through a ton of turbulence just, well, in general since COVID, right? It's been just a
Yep.
roller coaster ride across the board. So what we're seeing though is with technology, becoming so just easy to learn about, easy to, I mean, Google search it, et cetera, is this consultative approach is it's encouraging intellectual honesty, not only from the individual that's doing the selling or kind of managing the process, but it's also requiring intellectual honesty from the people that the consultants are working with, right? And being, because I don't know, this is just a personal opinion. I don't. when I have sales guys that come to my front door, or when I take a cold call or something like that, which I do every now and then, I'm not gonna just, oh, this is what you say, okay. That's that whole kind of
Mhm.
sales mindset. The hey, we're gonna cold call. We have the best thing in the world. You have to give people succinct, substantial, clear data, and to show them that, one, hey, I'm being honest, I'm not pulling wool over your eyes, which there, that in and of itself starts that first step to a good relationship, right? Because you're building that respect between the two
Mhm.
parties. And I think whether it's, yeah, like you said, whether it's dealing with the C-level type, or whether you're dealing with, a dock worker, is having that approach. It's, well, the old adage, treat the janitor just like you treat the CEO, right? Is getting
You
right.
should, because
It's,
100%.
my old man always said, treat people right and good things happen. And I think what we're seeing in an industry right now, especially specifically the supply chain, is the more that people are taking this consultative approach, the more that people are taking this educational approach, is really at the end of the day kind of what it is, the more
Mhm.
respect that individuals are getting, and those deeper those relationships are becoming. So I think, with as technology becomes more and more center stage, so to speak, the relationship aspect is also going to become more and more. And how you take, how the approaches that you take, I think, determine the outcomes of individual but also team success. And you have to be willing to have that conversational approach, have that data backed, informed approach, to be able to say, hey, you have the options. You can do this yourself. I'm here to simply help provide a little bit of outside guidance to show you why I think X, Y, or Z would be the best decision to make. In your example earlier, taking the median and so forth, and sharing that information, that just, transparency was a buzzword for so long last year, right?
Yeah.
Data visibility, transparency, well, that's great, and there are wonderful tools, Arvis being one of them, that highlight that. But it does start with the individual. Is, if you want to preach
Yeah.
transparency, you have to approach every meeting, every conversation with that lens, or people are going to peg a poser. It's not that difficult, especially in the logistics, to
Yeah.
find, to peg that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially, it was interesting. I had a gentleman get a hold of me, and he said, Dan, I can use your help. I said, sure. Like, what's going on? Because I'm about to lose a customer. I said, okay, well, you know, more context. And he went into, almost, like, not even almost, it was a very big pride thing. He was proud of the fact he was making $10,000 an order
Mhm.
profit. And I said, okay, hold on. You're what? He goes, I'm making $10,000 profit an order. And I said, well, what are you moving? And he says, oh, fan blades, like the big,
Like,
big air or
man,
energy, like the generator fan blades, right? And I was like, okay. And he said, but I had a carrier mess up. They couldn't pick up. So because this carrier couldn't pick up, they went to somebody else, and they're like $8,000 cheaper than me. And I said, okay. And he said, but I don't know why the customer is not going to keep using me. And I said, well, I said, like, how long did you expect to make $10,000 a load before, like, let's, because he's blaming it all on the carrier that didn't show up. And I said, okay, I understand where you're coming from, because I do understand that that's where his mindset is, because I've been there before. My mindset's been there, Aaron. But when I asked him, I said, okay, but what makes you think that, making $10,000 a load? And I get it. There OD, there's permits, there's escorts, but there's also a level to which, as a salesperson, you should understand that if you're making that kind of margin, you might make it for a very short period of time. At some time, somebody's going to get a hold of that person and just throw out a
yep.
number, and it's going to be way less than your 10 grand, because they're going to think 2 grand's a good profit on a $20,000 load, 10%. And you're sitting here saying, no, I want like
Mm.
30%. Very difficult. And I look at that and I said, well, why would you think you'd, I service them like you wouldn't believe. I said, no, I'm not saying you don't. But I said, you see, and I was very blunt with this individual. I said, you see, you're the problem that every other broker talks about. You're the reason customers are like, I want to deal with asset only.
Hmm.
And, you know, call a spade a spade. 2018, when ELDs kicked in full gear, asset companies took advantage of the ELD
Sure.
aspect, because if you look at the data behind ELD, 95% of carriers were on ELD for close to 2 years before that. So how is it all of a sudden that capacities tighten? And so I mean, I understand this, right? I understand during COVID,
Hmm.
carriers and brokers were like, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of them. They're like, Dan, I wrote my own paychecks during COVID. It was
Hmm.
awesome. And I'm like, how you liking that
Right.
now? And they're like, oh, it's tough. I'm like, how many customers you got now that you had during COVID? Oh, hardly any.
Hmm.
Well, again, that's not a consultative approach. That's a transactional. I want to make as much money as fast as possible. And I want to cash, quote unquote, cash in on this
Right.
shit. Right. And, I look at it and I say, I think this is where most people went wrong. Now think of a secondary thing,
Hmm.
right? Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, I know everybody's like pillaging people left, right, and center. What I want to do is I want to put you on a cost plus. So I'm going to give you 4 or 5 rates that I get in the market for each lane. We're going to pick the supplier together, and I want a 15% profit on it. Now, I think any business person would allow you to make 15%. But also, if you look at what would transpire now, would you not be the consultant that they want to stay with?
Right. Well, I really, I love everything that you just said. There's a lot to unpack there. And I think, you know,
Mm-hmm.
how do I say this? I'm just going to say it. Is I
Go
think
for it.
across the board, I think one of the biggest problems with sales folks in particular, but then entrepreneurs or even the C-level types, is they're, to your point, sacrificing long-term gains and long-term value for short-term reward, right? And when you don't take that
Hit the nail
consultative
right
approach,
there.
when you don't take that what you just said at the end, if you're taking that cost plus approach, that builds trust because you're being honest. And I think what gets, and you pointed out pride, as I think pride and greed tagged a lot of people coming out of COVID. Is I'm a free
Yeah.
market capitalist to the core, right? Um, but I have a conscience. Is
Mm.
absolutely hustle, grind, make money, do, especially in a sales role, is, I mean, you have numbers to hit. Everybody knows that, right? But the way in which you approach it determines the outcome. So for instance, that, if you're making $10,000 alone, hey, more power to you. But like, kind of to your point, how long does that last? Hey, if you brought it down
Yeah.
half of that and approached it with just, a little bit, it's easy to take advantage of people. I guess that's my point. Is,
Yeah. It is. And there's another part to it, Aaron, is if you choose to go in at let's use that one as an example, a $10,000 margin, you can't come
no,
down. Like and that's the thing, right? If you try and cut that in half, the immediate response from a customer is going to be, okay, hold on,
right.
what? How is it like in 10 minutes you were able to cut $5,000 off my
And if you come
bill? Like that ruins your credibility.
exactly, you get caught, and it's one of these. I think that's honestly a lot of reasons why we see so much turbulence, especially right now within the supply chain. Is you got your tech folks and you got your logistic
Mm,
folks, and they're kind of getting mashed together. So there's a lot of opportunity at this stage, especially with the economic market that we're currently in, high inflation. You look at the carrier flux that's going on right now. Is if you come in with a cost plus approach, a consultative approach, you're transparent. Everybody knows you got to make a buck. That's nothing new under the sun, or else you wouldn't be in business. So people know, depending on what you're running, what's fair. Back in my experience,
yeah.
somebody was like, it went back in my brokering days. I had an individual that they tried to. I got a piece of business, and it was a couple times a week, and up in New England, and it was, yeah, great opportunity, right? They're like, well, you should charge, it was like $300-400 more per run. And I'm like, no, we've already signed the contract, we've already talked about it. It's consistent business and it's repeatable business because of the price point. Is I'm making money as a broker. The brokerage is making money as the operation, the carrier's getting paid fairly, and the customer's happy. And it's, taking those consultative approaches. And well, the first one of the first things I said when I opened my business, I was talking with somebody. I said, it just comes down, don't be a schmuck. It's there's my Kentucky.
It is very simple. It is
That might
very
be some
simple.
Kentucky hick language there, but I think it's true. Is if you approach it with honesty and clarity, 9 times out of 10, even if they don't like what, let's say it doesn't work out or they have pushback or whatever, it's going to change the tone of the entire conversation, and it's going to change the tone in a positive way of the entire relationship. Because that's
Mm,
longevity should be the key, or should be the key goal here. It's, obviously, different companies, they have different strategic initiatives. So yes, as long as it falls under your strategic goals and plan, okay, great. You can ebb and flow with the market, but is price fairly, communicate
yeah.
often and clearly, and just,
Mm,
and if you screw up, you screw up. Just own it, take it in the teeth, move on.
yeah.
9 times out of 10, if you're just honest about it, yeah, bad things still might occur. You might lose a customer, or they might not do business with you. But at the end of the day, that's where I think a lot of sales folks in particular, and folks that I'm rubbing shoulders with, is you've got to you just got it's old school, but you got to bring it back. You got to bring that, and I guess cost plus is a great way to channel that in the environment that we have right now.
Mm.
It's how do you take the old school with the new school, combine it together, and create win-win scenarios for everybody. And I think it's just a matter of level setting. Is don't get too greedy, don't get too prideful, and approach everything with humility. Doesn't mean everything is going to work out and be hunky-dory, but more often than not, at least in my experience, it's done me right. you know
Yeah, and I think it gives you, and I'd love your opinion on this because I've kind of seen somewhat of a pattern through my career, right? Now, mind you, I haven't been in it as long as some of the people I know, but I'm approaching 31 years. So like it's been my only real career. I mean, besides that, I did a little bit of industrial construction and I buffered pewter keychains on night shift. You know what I mean? Like, so as I always say, I'm a little bit biased, but I love
Yeah.
the industry. I think uneducated sales reps sell, educated sales reps consult. And what I mean by that is nothing ill against any of you out there that are selling right now. I just think you haven't seen the bigger picture.
Mm,
And there is a bigger picture. And one thing that I say all the time, and I share this with new reps all the time, I share it with seasoned reps. I say, think about this for a second. Where would you be if you've never lost a customer? Right? Like, just think about that for 1 second. Like, the numbers that I would put on the table would be
mm,
astronomical if I never lost a customer. And then that bears a second question. And the second question is, when you did lose a customer, why did you lose them?
mm.
And I bet you 99% of the people can come back and say it was some kind of service
Sure.
failure, some kind of question that you probably didn't
Hmm.
ask that you maybe should have asked because you don't have a consultative
Mm,
approach, right? And you're a consultant, so you understand this. For all of you that haven't done the consulting piece yet, here will be a really good education piece for you that I'm going to ask Aaron to lay out. Okay, as a consultant, you cannot do your job properly unless you have all the facts, unless you have the data, unless you've seen how it operates, how it works. Like I've consulted at asset based companies, at brokerages, and they're like, well, let's just have an hour conversation. I'm like, no, it doesn't work like that. I need to fly in. I need to sit with your team for 2, 3 days. I need to monitor what people do. I need to be this fly on the
yep.
wall to see where the operation's breaking in order to be able to fix it. And I could give you general knowledge, but until I have a very clear scope of what's going on under your roof in your supply chain throughout the process, I can't give you an answer that's going to follow the path you're looking at getting to. And this is the type of thing that I see with
Mm,
salespeople is, can I get a rate? Oh, sure. What's the origin destination? The, the, oh, you need to drive in or reefer, flatbed. Okay. So you get three pieces of information: origin, destination, commodity, and equipment. So four. But really, there's about six different things you
mm,
need, right? How long is the delivery? What kind of services do they have for my driver? Is it first come first serve? Is it like, and all of these, and don't get me wrong, I was on this side for many, many, many years, brother. All of these equated to more problems down the line of the business. And it equated to that old Murphy's Law: the first load always screws up. Like, okay, if you really stop and think about it, it's like, oh my God, all of these things are connected. Does that
yeah.
make sense? And if it makes sense, can you share with the audience, as a consultant, as somebody that walks into a company, what are the five main things you look for before you can talk price, before you can talk anything?
Oh, five main things.
Mm. Told you it was
Yeah,
going to be a
no,
good
this
one,
is a good one.
everybody.
You're gonna make me think. This is good. No, the first thing I look for walking into a company, if we're talking, if we're talking a warehouse, a 3PL, assets, etc. And I do this with even on it changes based on the industry or the clients that I'm working with, because I have some local clients here as well that aren't in the supply chain. So it,
So can we direct this more just for the audience, Aaron? I
no, you're good.
apologize sincerely for interrupting you. Can we direct it more as a salesperson right now that's selling
Yes.
logistics, that's reaching out to shippers, that's reaching out to manufacturers? How would they implement these
Yeah.
strategies?
So first off, education is key. If before you even talk to the customer, know everything about what they do, know everything about their industry, know as much as you can find out without being creepy, right? Is no do your homework, because I think a lot of it comes down to an education piece on the salesman's part, and kind of like you said that you were in this, but I was in. I remember when I was breaking gum and fresh into this, is your sell, 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 sell. It's okay to
Mm. Numbers on the board, get numbers, get
take
numbers.
that time to get that 10,000-foot view and get a good working knowledge or at least understanding of the person that you're selling to. When you walk in the door or if you have a Zoom meeting, the second thing that I look at, to be quite frank, and this might sound very trite, but for me at least it's a big deal, is how does their leadership interact with their subordinates on the call? How is, or if you're in a
Hmm.
room, is what does, who's deferring to who regardless of position, and how are they interacting and engaging with each other? Because to be quite honest, after I do my homework, when I have that meeting, it might not be a good opportunity to pursue, right? So you can be along the chain, be like, you know what, this, I don't like, whether it's, I don't like how the leadership style is working with their team or treating their team or whatever it might be, um, or how they go about that initial, like if you're asking those initial questions, who's responding, and then how are they engaging with each other on those responses, keeping and keeping that mental note and that record. um, it's just back to the whole treating the janitor like the CEO, is if I'm going to do business with you or if
Hmm.
I'm going to sell to you, I'm not, I'm working with you and you're working with me for a shared end result. Yes, you are the customer, but you are not the king. you know, is and that might be out there to say, but that's just how I approach it. The third thing is once you get into
I don't think so.
when you get into the nitty gritty, is once you have identified the key decision makers, you're having these conversations, these initial conversations, is I always pull the reins back and I have them go through their entire tech stack with me, depending on what we're trying to solve, right? And I tell them I tell them exactly what I'm doing. So there's no like, "Oop, gotcha." There's no, "Well, why are we doing this?" Is we go through incrementally and say, "Well, what I have to offer would best fit X, Y, and Z, but I don't think you need it here or there." And then starting those conversations back to the whole cost plus kind of approach, that consultative approach, is immediately there's a recognition of, no, I still think what I have and what I'm selling, whether it's a service or a product to a 3PL or warehouse, no, what I'm having or what I have to offer provides value, But I'm being realistic and transparent from the standpoint is it's not going to help you there though. Don't overpay for stuff that you don't need. I think that's another thing too, is that,
Mhm.
kind of in that thread, money's important. Sales are, hitting your numbers are important. Don't be that guy. Don't be that greedy
Yeah.
guy. Fourth thing I would say, um, and the fourth and fifth, they're pretty generic, is get their strategic vision, their plan, because whatever you're implementing needs to be a part of that. So have a, as much as they're willing to share, get that from
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
Place, do your home.
Mhm. I think if you don't have that, every decision you make could be the wrong decision when you're thinking you're making
Right.
the right
When at the
decision.
end of the day, whatever
Yeah.
you're, whether you're a broker or a carrier talking to 3PL, whatever, at the end of the day, you have to align with what's best for that customer, right? How
Mhm.
can you provide that level of service or that truck or this software piece to best amplify their strategic goals? And then, fifth, I guess, oh, you put me on the spot. Um, Fifth, honestly, is and this is kind of again, this is just coming from my consulting. What I look for in these initial conversations is I flat out ask them what their turnover rate is. I will flat out ask somebody to
Mhm.
say, hey, what is your, because if you're a broker, what's your turnover rate? Well, if you have an incredibly high turnover rate, which it's logistics, there's always a 90% plus, or not always, but very often a 90% plus turnover. Okay, well, that's going to dictate if I'm a carrier sales rep or, working for a carrier, that will affect my driver. That will affect my on time percentage. That will affect, detention fees, all this stuff. If you're a broker, similar type of concept. If you're in the warehousing side of things, okay, well, is this product going to expire before you get it loaded, in the cold storage warehouse? Or how long are your dwell times? What are the expiration dates? What's your safety and compliance measures? Is, seeing all these things, seeing their turnover rate, or asking you just like, hey, what is your general consensus among the team? That influences my decisions on, hey, I can still help you, but let me take it a step further and help maybe address a couple of these um, secondary or tertiary issues that will help my driver, that will help my software, that will help my broker do the best job they can for you to delight your customer. Um, I don't know if that
Mm.
answered.
I like those.
That's off.
Yeah, it did. I saw it was interesting because I saw that switch in you when you went from talking about salespeople to shippers to being that consultant for 3PLs and freight companies. So it was actually very interesting because I actually love the way you did that, Aaron, because you're very passionate about what you do. And so the transition that I see for me is, when we're looking at it from a salesperson to a shipper perspective, is you can what's your turnover of suppliers? How often do you turn over suppliers? Why do you turn them over? What are the key buying factors when you turn them over? What's your pet peeves? How do you manage this? How do you manage that? Even calling the dock manager and saying, how is the dock going? How does it work? What is the best rate? What is the best route? What is the best way we can come in and out and be of value as opposed to being a headache, right? Because like everything, and we talked about it just before we hit record, when it comes to like our CRM, the biggest the biggest roadblock is not necessarily is the CRM good because it's the best. The biggest roadblock is what's my turnover cost.
Right.
And so as a consultant, right? Um, and I'm talking to you, the professional sales reps out there. As a consultant, so let me rephrase that. As a sales rep, you might not care about the cost it takes a customer to bring you in. As a consultant, you always make sure there's a 10 to 20x ROI on bringing you in. And I think and I'd love your thoughts on it, Aaron, before we close
Yeah.
off here. But I think the biggest piece of that is when you're operating as a consultant, there's always a way, excuse me, or you as an individual are always pushing for a minimum of a 10x ROI. And you look at agencies, you look at all of these companies. If they don't get that ROI, they're not in the top tier of consulting. So it's like, to me, it's finding how, I love the fact that you added in number 4 was their strategic goals, because that's how we understand if we can get them the
Right.
ROI. Right? Like, I've had customers where they've said, "Well, this is my demerge time." So, "What's your goal?" They go, "To knock it to zero." Okay, this is how I'll knock it to zero. They go, "Well, you're 10% higher than our present carry." I go, "I am, but I'll knock it to
Right.
zero." And if you look at that 10%, it's 220,000 a year, but you're spending 2.86 on demerge. So you're up
Right.
2.56, 2.54, whatever. And do you want to be up 2.54, or do you want to talk about the 10% that we're higher? And we're higher. The reason you're not up at you're at 2.86 in demerge is because you're not paying that extra
Right.
10%, because nobody cares. They care about themselves, and that's it. And it was a bit of convincing, but when we did it, within 12 months they were at zero demerge.
Right.
So we didn't 10x, we like 100x'd
Which is phenomenal.
what the
Right.
ROI was.
Which, I mean, it's phenomenal. And that, you have to, from a consulting side, well, when it comes to sales and consult, yes, I agree with you, because transactional business will always be there. I think that's what that's
Yeah.
it. Transactional, it's not a negative thing. It's just business. It's always going to happen. It's always going to be around. You're always going to have people that are comfortable with being transactional, and then so accepting that, yes, just move forward. But after okay, I'm going to do the X, Y, and Z. You can go through the stereotypical sales, you know, rah rah for your transactional business. But if there's business that you see or genuinely have an interest in growing, or if there is a company that you're trying to bring on that could, once they're landed, really expand, that's when you have to take that consultative approach. Is you have to think, okay, what am I not only getting their strategic vision and goals, but what am I bringing to the table? Where am I going to bring them back to the whole value add a year from now, 3 years from now? And it can vary based on contract, or if it's project based, whatever you're working on. But you have to have that constant perspective of they have to have value. There's so many consultants out there, and I'd say the same, goes for sales. Is they give great advice. I've never been a consultant that just gives advice. I back to your, I want to get on the floor. I want to be on your warehouse floor. I want to be the dummy that you're leading around, and you are telling me about every nook and cranny and because the more that I am able to, as a consultant, understand your business, I don't need to be I don't need to do what you do necessarily, Mr. CEO or COO or whatever it might be, but is having a good, solid understanding of your key pain points, your key initiatives, and even your price points. Is okay, here's the rational use case and scope of work that I can build to present to you and help grow with your team. A line that I use, and it started kind of, it was a little like a shtick line, but it made me laugh, and a couple of people liked it. Is I'm here to grow with you, not gouge you. Right? Is going into that perspective is, hey, I want to 10x what our relationship here. I want to 10x the value at the end, at the end of this year, or whatever it might be based on their goals. But more consultants, more sales folks, they got to be willing to put in a little homework, a little bit of that grind, because I think that's what we're getting to. It's an old school way of doing business, but I think it's the right way to do business. And I think with the advent of technology, it's going to shine a light on areas in which we're not doing the things that you just discussed, or the consultants aren't focusing on the key, value adds that we've been discussing. And I think, yes, there's a difference from sales to consulting. If you're an independent consultant like me, yes, you might approach things differently from being your, new sales rep on the broker floor, right? There are sales fundamentals that you have to learn regardless. You have to learn them. If you don't take the time to learn them, you're going to fail. But if you're trying to build your book of business, if you're trying to, if you're invested in what you're doing, take the time, because your customers will see that. But then, like, going back to it, they're going to peg a poser. If you get 3 months into a contract and you're in over your head, it's not going to be that difficult to see. And then your customer's definitely not going to get that value. You just tarnished your reputation. You've wasted everybody's time. And unfortunately, there's a lot of examples of that, especially post COVID. Yeah, I mean, look at the amount of brokerages that were formed during COVID. Look at the amount of carrier operations, carriers that were formed during COVID. They're gradually trickling back down now. And I think a lot of people got on the train of, oh, there's some good money. There's, dollars are flying, but they didn't approach it with a long-term sustainable type perspective. You have to be able to provide that value to your customers, whether you're in a phenomenal market or a garbage market. And you got to price yourself fairly and be clear with expectations.